Good afternoon. My name is Sunny. So I'm the founder of KUI Studios, an open innovation lab for enterprises, really helping them understand their business problem, identifying and matching solutions in the emerging tech space, usually developed by a startup. And so really helping companies, government, and government agencies trying to transform into the new and rethink and reimagine themselves, not just for this pandemic, but also other pandemics that are to come, and also the new and any other economic declines that we will face in the future. So I am not here alone. Right now you can see Lauren and Wasim, and I will introduce them a bit later. But I just really want to set the context for this conversation today. So hold on, just one moment. So like I said, I'm joined by Wasim. Firstly, I wanted to just set the context. So we are looking at learning reimagine. So really trying to help organizations rethink and how they actually skill their employees. What I've gathered today is a panel of people that touch on different aspects of the learning journey. So I'll start by introducing Wasim. Wasim is the CEO of NYDA, and he'll tell you more about himself just now. But really, he's focused on developing young people, and a portion of the young people's life from the time that they were 7 years old to the time that they're 18 years old is about actually learning and being in a formal learning education environment in most cases. And then after that, it's about actually giving young people further skills to help them enter the job market. And so hopefully he can lend some insights on like really the challenges they're facing around reskilling, upskilling young people, and how they're reimagining educating young people of the future leaders of tomorrow, actually. And then we've got Lauren, who's an executive and HR exec at BCX, and really she works with a big group of employees, what we consider a workforce, and really trying to help them reimagine themselves and be like, a leader, a CEO, a CFO, and really how do they lead teams, how do they reskill themselves in response to the challenges that the company is facing, and so what are the tools that they're using right now to actually upskill themselves. I'm looking for interesting examples, given that it was COVID-19, there was no contact amongst the employees. So how were they carrying on with actually reskilling and upskilling the employees in these restricted times? And then you've got Jean-Pierre, who is a sales and marketing director at VR Dynamics. VR Dynamics develops solutions specifically around using virtual reality and augmented reality around learning. Those are the new trends of learning going forward. I'm hoping that he can shed some light on how you can reskill your people using in a new manner, actually, virtual reality and augmented reality. And what inspired this conversation was that when there was a survey done at the beginning of the pandemic, I'd say probably in April, about 43% of business leaders said that they believe their current workforce cannot help them deliver their business demands, which is quite, alarming and quite concerning, actually, when you've got thousands of people and you believe that 430 of them actually, not 430, but rather that most leaders believe that they're not skilled enough to actually help them with the current business demands. Do you fire those people? Do you let them go? Do you reskill them? Do you redeploy them to other divisions? There's so many solutions we can think about. And really what we're trying to discuss here today is how do we reimagine the whole learning space for our young people, for employees, and how do we use solutions in the future going forward? So without further ado, I'm going to allow Jean-Pierre to come on. I've already set the context. I'm going to switch my video off. I will be in the background. And then whilst Jean-Pierre is coming on, if Lauren can just maybe introduce herself and also just tell us about, what does the new way of learning actually look like right now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. As already introduced, I'm Lauren Victoria. I'm an executive HR business partner in the BCX space. So BCX is the largest ICT firm in South Africa and have a presence as well in Africa. So you can imagine for a firm size of ours, digital transformation is just something that we live and work. And I think what the pandemic has actually done is actually forced both our managers and our employees to think differently when it comes to learning. They didn't have a choice, and it actually just push people to think differently, to get out of their boxes, and to really apply themselves in terms of the learning. And I'll share some of those experiences a bit later.
Wasim, our CEO, who is really in charge of young people in the country. If you think about it, so we just want to what does learning in the new actually look like for young people going forward?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sandiso. I don't know about being in charge. We still do live in a democracy, as far as I remember. But yeah, at the NYDA, we're really passionate about three things. Developing young entrepreneurs, creating pathways into jobs for young people, and youth service projects which add benefits to the community. And I think obviously COVID-19 has forced a rethink on everything that we do, but maybe kind of as an opening statement is looking at it from an organizational perspective. I think everybody knows the bottom line has been impacted by the pandemic, and how do we? A lot of the times, the first place to go and cut is the human resource budget, and particularly learning and development. And how do we avoid that, or how do we make better use of our HR budgets that we continue skilling our people? And then maybe the second point is to say, I think we were moving towards a situation of blended learning, be it in academia or even in the workplace environment. But blended learning still requires some level of social interaction. I thought Stephen Crotters made a good point the other day. He says, lots of young people who have come into the workplace who have often learned just by observing superiors or supervisors or whatever. And that kind of on-the-job learning is where we know that the majority of young people learn their skills. And what happens to that in a post-COVID world, or as we live through this pandemic? So maybe just some opening statements to get the conversation going. Thanks, Andisa.
Jean-Pierre, what does learning in the new look like for you?
What does learning in the new look like? 2 words: digital transformation. It is a well-known fact that people learn best by doing. However, if you look at modern education, you will see that little learning actually happens by doing. Students are more focused on reading instructions rather than using them in practice. The question is, how can we get students to experience more practical scenarios in a controlled area with little or even no risk? And the answer is virtual reality. Let's just scroll back there, excuse me. Virtual reality transforms the way educational content is delivered, not only by enhancing student learning and engagement, but also providing outstanding visualizations that aren't in the traditional classroom. Therefore, we can bring students to the educators to the students in a virtual manner, in instances such as the lockdown that we recently endured. Well, we are still in.
So I just have a question. You've spoken a lot about digital transformation and virtual reality, and I'm assuming, or not that I'm assuming, I know all of these new learning measures require hardware. It requires data. It requires, also some sort of know-how of how to use this virtual reality stuff. And so, Wasim, I just wanted to ask for you to respond to that. Is that a viable solution, and what can government do? What has government done in recently to actually enable young people to be connected and to access facilities such as a virtual reality experience?
Very much a dual economy country. Yeah? On the one hand, you have the privileged who seem to navigate through life and succeed, and we produce some of the most amazing entrepreneurs and professionals in this country. And on the other hand, you have so many people who lack access to basic services, one of those basic services being education, and it ultimately leads to the outcomes and this massive inequality in South Africa. Yeah, I think the one thing that has been highlighted is this massive digital divide in South Africa. Yeah, we have some of the highest data costs on the African continent, if not the world. And there's many opportunities for young people to earn, especially in the gig economy. We see young people in Nigeria and Kenya being able to freelance for work in the United States or Europe from the comfort of their homes. In South Africa, that's not too possible given the high level of data costs that we have. So government, as part of its economic recovery plan, has identified the digital divide as one area for potential quick win. I think we've seen good or decent free Wi-Fi rollouts in mainly metropolitans, but I came across a statistic the other day that says 80% of households in South Africa have access to a television set, but I think only 20% have access to a desktop or laptop computer, right? And I mean, when Bill Gates had this vision for Microsoft, is to put a computing device into every household. So as part of the economic recovery plan, there's an ambitious plan to take 9 million low-cost data sets into vulnerable households and put 6 million people within 5 minutes walking distance of free Wi-Fi services. And I think alone doing that together with the release of Spectrum can really help us in starting to bridge this digital divide. And I think we've got to have a broader vision beyond that to say, how do we put a device in every household? Because the amount of learning that can unlock and the amount of access that can give to services like VR is just massive for South African society.
Thank you so much. Lauren, for you, I would like you to just speak to us about what are the solutions existing in the market around upskilling of individuals, of corporations. What have you seen in the market take shape that we could leverage the infrastructure Wasim is talking about, that people not only in corporate but also just outside of corporate can actually access and start using to upskill themselves? Thank you. Lauren.
I think that from an affordability perspective, we also need to look at small and medium-priced enterprises. They need to obviously look at affordable options. I think from a learning aspect, though, there's a number of platforms, technical platforms. If we're specifically looking at the ICT industry, there's a lot of learning platforms that are internationally have international certifications and so forth, where people can really now embrace the digital transformation. And if we can look at how we can reduce that gap. So, for instance, the BCX Learn platform that we've launched is a free platform, learning platform for students. If we can look at initiatives and bring in more initiatives like that, then we can actually close that gap and people can have more access to international websites and international learning. So it doesn't matter where you're learning from. It actually makes it possible for a lot more people to learn if you can look at options to close that gap.
And so if this is for you, John Pierre, so
yes.
You're in the space and you've seen a couple of solutions, and maybe speak to what you think is available on the market for people in corporates and individuals to actually use, considering that affordability is a challenge for everyone, even the ones that were rich before the pandemic. Affordability is a challenge for them today. What are the options? Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, as we discussed earlier, the majority of the new strategies are and will be digital. And how can we avoid leaving the digitally divided behind? Well, many may think that VR has a high price point that is a significant barrier for many of us. However, if we can focus on creating VR experiences for devices users already have, such as cell phones, we can repurpose them into tools for education so that every single student with a smartphone and access to internet can use this for learning platforms. Just a quick fact, as of today, about 20 to 22 million people in South Africa use a smartphone, and that accounts for about a third of the country's population. And it's predicted to grow by more than 5 million by the year 2023. So if we were to go VR, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to have all the fancy hardware and all those things, which obviously increases the cost in the end. We could look at a more simplified, easy accessible, cost-effective solution that we can implement using the cell phones.
Yeah. So Wasim, for you, like what I want to understand is we're in a time where I think our learning needs to change in order for us to be able to meet the current business demand. So what new sort of ways do you think we're going to be learning, like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You know, I'm reimagining South Africa where people have access to broadband within like 1 kilometer radius from their house. So what does that mean going forward for just not only the individual themselves, but also the economy as well when we skill our people?
Yeah, I want to refer back and not only look at it in an education perspective, but let's look at it from a workplace perspective, right? And then when the pandemic started, I think there was a lot of viewpoints expressed to say the traditional office is dead, and it won't really be necessary in the future. And we've been telling you for years that this was coming. It's only the fossils who didn't want to get on board or whatever. And I mean, I think a lot of work can be done from home. And I think there's also a management perspective to it, is that micromanagement is not necessarily always there. You can unlock people's creativity wherever they may work from. Yeah. But I think as the lockdowns have progressed, you've almost seen a craving for social interaction amongst people. And as we've gone down the lockdown levels in the risk adjusted strategy, you've seen people's need to interact with others. And I don't think humans will ever stop being social beings. I'm pretty sure everybody on this call is a university graduate, and you probably reflect back on your university experience. As much as it was the education who shaped you, it was the networks you were able to establish, the interactions you had with your classmates, your lecturers, the sports you participated in. So I very much see the future as being blended. I think that the fact that different people learn in different ways will continue to exist. But I think the wonderful proposition is that with blended learning and with using tech more effectively, you collect rich amounts of data on how people learn, yeah? And you can adjust teaching strategies to best suit the individual needs, and definitely to assist those who may have learning disabilities or anything like that. And I think that is where the real opportunity lies for South Africa, in really bridging the inequality gap.
And Lauren, I mean, for you, you lead a big workforce in terms of just human capital development, etc. So can you tell us, in your study and in your analysis, what learning strategies or learning solutions no longer work, or what are no longer applicable, and like what do you see becoming more trendy and more current in this day and age?
That will ever get rid of the need for face-to-face interaction. But what has worked for us is to really look at digital learning, because we have a lot of engineers and so forth that are all across the country. They are in random places. And what we actually found is within the pandemic, what actually happened is we had a lot of people with comorbidities that weren't allowed to go into work, that weren't allowed to go to client sites. And we actually launched an opportunity for young people to actually learn new skills, who were able to actually go to the site and do virtual training with the skilled experts that would normally go to site. So we saw what we spoke a little bit earlier about on-the-job training. We saw a virtual on-the-job training happening just naturally. And that was highly successful, especially in our technical areas. And it gave a lot of people opportunity to do things that they normally wouldn't do, because an expert or a more senior person would be assigned to a specific job. So that is something that I can share that has been really successful, and obviously being influenced by the pandemic.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite the audience to ask any questions. And just the last response is from, well, could be the last, is from John Pierre. So how are you seeing organizations think differently? In convincing a CEO that they must abandon their current training and move on to virtual reality system is not an easy thing to do. It's new for everyone. It's somehow it's a new hardware cost that nobody envisioned to have, and also we can speak about the outcomes of virtual reality versus basic online learning. I'm sure that in terms of like outcomes, it's much more higher in VR. It's more interactive. It's more. So how do you just tell us about the journey from convincing the CEO to actually implement this virtual reality, augmented reality, and then speak about the actual benefits that companies can actually attain if they were to switch to this new way of working?
That's a good question. Thank you, Sandiso. Okay, so obviously, yes, times are changing, and it is difficult to persuade certain people to transition the whole model of their company to doing things virtually. But what we've noticed during the pandemic, there's companies have different needs. Some companies rely on human interaction. Some of them do not necessarily, such as companies that offer training and so on. For instance, if you're a car sales, a sales dealership, and we're in the pandemic, nobody's allowed to leave the house, but the company still needs to function. You can perhaps then sell the vehicle to another user virtually without them actually physically meeting. But persuading the people all depends on their needs. If you have a company that, let's say it's a soldering company, and obviously soldering it's a high risk job to do. So with the training and so on, there could be potential injuries, fatalities, all those kind of things. If you can develop a platform where you can create a safe environment for the training of the soldering or working with chemicals in a lab in a safer environment for the students to learn before putting them in real environments, separating the competent from the incompetent before, could potentially then decrease the cost to company for injuries and all those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very good selling point, especially in the mining space where fertility is something to be avoided at all times. So that's very interesting.
100%.
So yeah, so thank you so much. If any of the speakers have got their lasting remarks, by all means, please signal, then I will give you an opportunity to speak. So, but we've come to the end of our webinar. Lawrence, Wasim, you good? Okay, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our webisode. Thank you for joining us. Please look out for the actual write-up of this, which is a point of view, just talking about how we actually reimagining learning as a country, as a sector, as an individual, how you can actually jump onto this new learning reimagined. So thank you so much for your time and have a good afternoon. Have a good long weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy Heritage Day.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.